The sun hung low in the sky, casting a burnt, orange glow across the wooden facades of Sagebrush Creek. Dust swirled in restless circles, kicked up by boots, wagon wheels, and horses that shifted anxiously at the edge of the crowd. It was one of those evenings when the air itself seemed to tremble with fear, as if the town knew something terrible was brewing. In the center of it all, a long wooden platform stood like a stage for something cruel. Women, 6 of them, stood bound in a line, their wrists loosely tied with coarse rope. Their tired faces reflected the same hopeless story. They had been caught up in a tradition they had no say in. The sheriff, a heavy, set man with a thick mustache and a temper that burned hotter than the desert sun, strutted across the platform like he owned the land beneath his boots. His voice boomed over the murmuring townsfolk. "Choose any woman you want," he commanded, raising his hand dramatically as if he were presenting merchandise. The crowd fell silent, each person turning their eyes toward the stranger standing off to the side, the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy who had wandered into Sagebrush Creek only hours earlier. Illy Mercer stood rigid, jaw tight, hat pulled low over his eyes. The grit of the town clung to his coat, sticking to sweat and stubbornness. He hadn't come to take part in whatever madness this was. He had come searching for safety, shelter, and a chance to build a stable life for his daughters. That was all he'd wanted for months, peace, but Sagebrush Creek wasn't offering peace. Instead, it was presenting him with a sick spectacle. Beside him, his little twin girls clung to the sides of his chaps. Lily and Leela, 6 years old, sweet, faced and dressed in matching pink cotton dresses, held tightly onto each other. Their blonde hair, tangled from the long journey, fluttered in the wind. They looked nothing like the harshness around them. They were soft edges in a world made of brutal lines. Illy scanned the scene, his throat tightening. The women on the platform weren't criminals. They weren't troublemakers. They were victims of fear of the outlaw gang that had been terrorizing the region for weeks. The sheriff's twisted custom, meant to protect the town, forced women to be claimed by men for their safety. Illy hated it. Everything about it felt wrong, cruel, unnecessary. He had seen ugliness in his life, far too much of it, and this was the kind that left scars on souls. One woman betrayed the others by simply existing in defiance. She stood taller, her posture straighter, too proud to bend, too dignified to break. She wore a deep red dress, torn slightly at the hem, dust and sweat staining the fabric, but she looked like something carved out of courage. Her dark hair, half undone, fell around her pale shoulders, and her eyes, sharp, stormy, filled with restrained fire, locked with Illy's for a fleeting moment. That single moment struck him harder than the desert wind. Something about her didn't fit the scene. She didn't look afraid. She looked like someone carrying a hidden truth. Lily tugged on Illy's coat. "Papa, why are they tied?" she whispered, voice trembling. Before Illy could answer, Leela squeezed her sister's hand. They looked scared. She murmured. Illy crouched down, pulling his daughters closer to him, shielding them from the cruelty of the sight. "Stay close to me," he said softly, brushing dust off their cheeks. "No one's gonna hurt you, I promise." He stood again, ready to walk away with his girls, but then the sheriff barked louder. "You, stranger." He pointed directly at Illy. "You're new, you've got strength, and we're short on men who can fight. Choose one of them or keep moving out of my town." Illy's heart lurched with anger. Choose a woman like cattle. He shook his head and stepped forward, drawing the crowd's attention. "Sheriff," he said calmly but firmly, "this isn't protection. This is punishment." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "This town's rules kept us alive." "No," Illy countered, voice steady. "Fear kept you alive, but it won't save you now." Before the sheriff could argue, a sudden hush fell over the crowd again. The woman in the red dress shifted, lifting her chin. Her gaze, those stormy eyes, fell on Illy's daughters. A flicker of recognition, a soft gasp, a subtle tremble of relief. Something passed between her and the girls, something Illy couldn't explain, and that was the moment his life, his daughters' lives, began to change forever. The sheriff's impatience crackled in the air like a fuse ready to ignite. His fingers twitched at his belt, and his wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over eyes burning with irritation. Illy could feel the weight of every stare in Sagebrush Creek pressing on him. So many faces, angry, tired, suspicious, watching, waiting, judging. The town didn't trust outsiders. Outsiders brought questions, and questions stirred fear. Well, the sheriff barked again, thumping his boot on the platform so hard the planks rattled. Pick one, stranger, or move along. We ain't got time for your moral speeches. Pick a woman. Illy's jaw clenched. His fingers curled at his sides, knuckles whitening beneath his gloves. This isn't right. He repeated, calmer but louder this time. His voice carried across the square. They need protection, not ownership. Gasps rippled. He could practically feel the crowd recoil. No one in Sagebrush Creek ever challenged the sheriff. No one was bold or foolish enough. A few women in the audience lowered their eyes, as though they wanted to agree, but feared the consequences. Most of the men scowled, shifting angrily. And yet there were a handful of old ranchers, younger cowhands, who glanced between Illy and the sheriff with uneasy respect, unsure which side their loyalty should fall on. The sheriff took one step toward Illy, boots thudding heavy. "We don't care for outsiders telling us how to run things," he growled. "The outlaw gang's ridden back soon, and these women need someone who will fight for 'em. It's how we stop 'em from being taken." Illy's eyes flicked toward the women on the platform. Their expressions were a blend of fear and exhaustion, and something else he recognized from his past, the look of people who had been silenced for too long. The woman in the red dress was different. She didn't look down. She didn't tremble. She looked straight at him, unflinching, and in her gaze, Illy saw something he couldn't quite name. A story, a warning, a question, and then something unexpected. Illy felt small hands tug at him again. Lily and Leela, who had been eerily quiet since the sheriff raised his voice, suddenly shifted. Their innocent eyes widened with dawning recognition. It was Lily who spoke first, voice so soft Illy almost thought he imagined it. "Papa," she whispered, "that's her." Illy frowned, glancing down. "Who, sweetheart?" Leela stepped forward, pointing directly at the woman in the red dress. "Papa, that's her," she cried with urgency. "That's the lady who helped us." The crowd reacted instantly, heads whipping toward the twins, whispers racing like wildfire. Illy froze. His heartbeat stuttered. His daughters had mentioned a woman 2 nights ago, a stranger who found them after the storm, when their wagon broke, and he'd been knocked unconscious. They had described her with childlike wonder, a tall woman in a red dress, who wrapped them in her shawl, shared dried fruit, and told them stories until the storm passed. He had chalked it up to imagination. They were scared, lost, and children often created angels in their minds when the world turned dark. But the woman before him wasn't imagined. She was real. Her lips parted slightly, and her eyes softened, filling with tears. She quickly blinked away. She recognized them. She was relieved to see them. She was alive, thankfully, and now here she stood, bound and accused of nothing. The sheriff's voice broke the moment. "You know her." His tone shifted, not softer, but calculating. Suspicious, Illy stared at the woman. She nodded once, barely perceptible, then looked at his daughters again with a tenderness that pierced him. Illy straightened his back. "Yes," he said firmly, "I know her." He paused, letting the truth settle over the crowd like dust. "And I'm not choosing her." A stunned hush fell over the square. "I'm protecting her." Lily and Leela rushed forward, wrapping their small arms around the woman's skirt, clutching her like a long, lost friend. She gasped softly, pressing her bound hands against their heads as best she could. The crowd gasped and whispered again, some surprised, some angry, some confused. The sheriff frowned deeply, his jaw grinding like a millstone. "Protection comes with conditions in this town, Mercer." Illy didn't flinch. He stepped up the platform, placing himself between the woman and the sheriff. His coat swayed in the dusty breeze, his tall frame casting a protective shadow over her. The sheriff held his stare, trying to overpower him, but Illy's will was iron. Before another word could be spoken, the woman finally broke her silence. "I have information," she said, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "About the outlaw gang." The sheriff and Illy both turned sharply to her. Her words fell like thunder. "They're not coming next week," she whispered. "They're coming tonight." The entire crowd stiffened. The air went dead silent. The dust stopped swirling, and suddenly every choice, every argument, every tradition meant nothing. Only her truth remained. The revelation fell over Sagebrush Creek like a sudden storm, silent, suffocating, electric. The townsfolk froze, eyes wide, breaths held, as if the air itself had gone still. Even the dust seemed suspended in the fading sunset light. The sheriff's mallet, which moments earlier seemed ready to strike, now hung helplessly in his limp hand. Illy stared at the woman in the red dress, really stared, and saw the truth shimmering behind her fear. She wasn't breaking under pressure. She was risking her life to save others. Knowing the gang was coming tonight meant she had information. Dangerous information, and dangerous information rarely came without a price. "You'd better start talking," the sheriff murmured, voice stripped of arrogance. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The woman swallowed hard. She shifted her bound wrists and lifted her chin. "They're not riding from the south," she said. "They're already near the ridge. They've been watching the town since dawn." Her words sent a collective shudder through the crowd. Illy felt his blood run cold. That ridge sat less than a mile away. He had traveled past it coming into town. He remembered the eerie stillness, the rustling brush. He had thought it was just desert wind. "Why didn't you say this before?" the sheriff hissed. "Because you silenced me," she shot back, her tone sharper than the wind that whipped her skirt. "Every time I tried to warn you, you told me to shut my mouth. You called me a liar, locked me up, and tied me to a post like an animal." Her voice cracked, not from fear but fury. Illy stepped closer to her, loosening the ropes at her wrists with strong, careful fingers. "Easy," he murmured. She looked at him for a long, lingering moment. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, fear, yes, but also hope. Lily and Leela hugged her again, small arms wrapping around her waist like lifelines. The crowd watched stunned as the twins clung to her with so much innocence and trust that even hardened cowboys softened. The sheriff exhaled long and heavy. "Why tonight?" He pressed. The woman's shoulders sagged. "Because they want him." She turned her head, eyes locking onto Illy's. A hush fell so deep it could break glass. Illy's heart slowed. "Me," he whispered. She nodded. "You're Illy Mercer, the ranger from Redstone Pass, the man who helped capture the gang's seconding command last year. They didn't know where you went, but they do now." Illy's entire body stiffened. He thought he had outrun his past. He thought he could start new. He thought he could protect his daughters by disappearing. But shadows from old battles had chased him across states and deserts, until they finally found him here. The sheriff blinked hard. "Why would the gang target your girls?" The woman's voice softened painfully. "Because they knew the only way to break you was through them." Lily and Leela tightened their grip on her skirt. Illy's heart hammered with such force he could barely breathe. Rage surged inside him, not reckless anger, but protective fury, the kind that made a man unstoppable. He turned to the sheriff. "We prepare, now." His voice was a command, not a request. The sheriff hesitated, for the first time showing humility. Then he nodded. "Tell the men, arm the rooftops, block the north road." His orders rippled into the crowd, and men sprang into action. Horses were mounted, rifles grabbed, lanterns lit. The town transformed in seconds, fear turning to purpose, chaos to strategy. Illy moved to the woman, lifting the final ropes from her wrists. Her skin beneath was red and bruised. He held her hands gently, almost reverently. "You saved my daughters," he said, voice thick. "You saved me even before I knew I needed saving." A flicker of vulnerability crossed her features. "I couldn't leave them in the storm," she whispered. "Or let that gang get them. You risked everything," he said. She shook her head. "No, not everything, not yet." She looked at him with something deeper, something he understood without needing words. The twins looked between them. "Why?" "Died." Leela tugged his sleeve. "Papa, can she stay with us?" The question broke something open inside Illy. A moment of quiet certainty amid the storm building around them. He brushed the woman's hair away from her face, gentle as a promise. "Yes," he said, "she stays with us." The sheriff turned one last time. "Tonight, we fight together." As the sun sank completely, surrendering to a violent night, Illy stood with the woman and his daughters at the center of the battlefield that would soon come. His past had found him, but so had something else. Someone his daughters had chosen long before he did.